Morning, I'm privileged to have such a 29th AIGS Theological Forum with a special guest from SIM. We have so many visitors from SIM today. And I learned that today, because of some preparation for final exam, some of the students are coming, but they are not yet arrived. So we shall see to that one. I wish to open this forum inviting the Vice President of AIGS University, Dean of AIGS, to open a prayer.
Okay, let's pray. Heavenly precious Father, we come to you today asking for your guidance, wisdom, and support as we begin this meeting. And we do pray that you bless us with your presence in the midst of us and help us to engage in meaningful discussion and allow us to grow closer as a community and group and nurture the bonds of a community. Father, anoint Dr. Joshua Bogunjoko especially with your spirit of wisdom as he delivers the seminar, and also bless us and fill us with your grace, Lord, as we, the AIGS community, listens to him carefully, and continue to remind us that all that we do here today, all that we accomplish, is for the pursuit of the truth, for the greater glory of you. Father, let this be for the service of humanity and for the extension of your kingdom. In your precious name I pray, amen.
Before I introduce you, our honorable speaker, to all of you, I wish to share about my own experience with SIM. It was in 1994 when I entered Chongqing Theological Seminary as a student, theological student. I joined a missionary training center which was run by one of the SIM member, Dr. Son Young-jun, who was the director of that missionary training center. That was the first moment that I was introduced what was like SIM. By that time I was told it's a Sudan Inland Mission. Now it is serving in mission. But the name has been changed such a way, though we believe that the initials are same as the before. And then I was really thinking of that, whether I should be sent to mission field as a member of SIM, because I was trained from the SIM missionaries who came from Canada, Australia, and especially from America and in Korea as well. By the grace of God, I was taken by my denominational church to be sent to Ghana as a missionary over there. And over there, I could see some of the SI missionaries, especially Dr. Joshua Kim as my senior of my Chongqing Theological Seminary, and then we had an intimate and a great relationship with each other. And then I was taken to the SIM director in Ghana, and then that was a place I could hear many experience from her about the mission in Africa as well. And at the beginning of my doctoral research as a PhD student, that was 2013, I met another SIM missionary that was my supervisor, who became my supervisor of my thesis, Professor Alison Howell, who used to be an SIM missionary and become the faculty member of the institution itself. So as we see this, from my own theological training, the beginning of theological training And the ending of my missionary work, it covered with SIM. So more or less I can say I am one of the product of SIM. And honorably today, I'm introducing you the SIM International Director. Dr. Joshua Bogunjoko was born in Nigeria in 1960. His life in Christ began during his second year of high school. That was established by SIM as well. So he started his kind of Christian life with the SIM as well. He surrendered to the Lord's direction to study medicine, graduated and completed his residency in family medicine at a mission hospital in, is it Jos? Jos, Nigeria. He later served at the SIM hospital in Galmi, Niger, with his wife. Also, she is a doctor, Joanna Bogunjoko. Eventually became both the chief medical officer and hospital director. They joined SIM in the year of 1995. Almost getting to 30 years now. Is that right? And then he began a 5-year term as the international director of SIM in June, since June 2013, becoming the first non-Western and the first African leader of service and mission SIM. So I'm so much proud of him to welcome as our honorable speaker. You're welcome. Please welcome.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Can I help someone with manage this? Is that correct? Okay, thank you. Thank you so much for that introduction, and thanks again for the leadership of this university, inviting me and allowing me to be a part of what is going on here, and to share with you on this topic this morning, and looking at the topic of global mission, and especially global mission in post-pandemic era. Global mission in post-pandemic era. And I've chosen the topic for this morning to be the mission Goliaths of our time. Now you might be wondering, where is that from? Mission Goliaths, and why that topic? It's because we're looking at a post-pandemic era of mission. And there are certain things that have become quite obvious since the pandemic. And I will be looking at some of those today, as well as some of the key issues in global mission that we face currently. I put a passage there, Psalm 67:4, because a lot of things that I'll be sharing is going to revolve around the mission of God to the nations. In Psalm 67:4, says, "May the nations be glad and sing for joy." May the nations be glad and sing for joy. Mission is about the nations. Mission comes from God. God is the initiator of missions, and the nations of the world are his focus. So may the nations sing for joy. And that passage is from Psalm 67. First, I want to start by pointing out some of the areas I'll be covering in this lecture. As we consider global mission in the post-pandemic era, 3 items will be discussed, or I'll be addressing 3 items or 3 things that I have described as giants of missions. The first is the Goliath of a lack of access to the gospel. The Goliath of a lack of access to the gospel. Now, I'm using Goliath for a specific reason. When I talk about giants, I think the most popular giant in the Bible was called Goliath. wasn't it? So the most popular giant in the Bible was Goliath. So I'm using the word Goliath because remember, even though Goliath was a giant, he was still taken down by the power of God. So the implication is that everything I'll be sharing with you as mission Goliaths can still be taken down by the power of God. Okay, so I want you to bear that in mind. The second is the Goliath of lack of access to the means of livelihood. And the third is the Goliath of a rapidly changing global mission context, global mission reality. Because as we face the lack of access to the gospel in some places, a lack of access to livelihood in other places, globally, the mission scene is changing rapidly, basically every day in our world today. So those are the three areas I'll be addressing. And in that, you can follow me on the PowerPoint, but you have more details in a handout that you will receive, I believe. When you talk about access, when you look at the world from an access perspective, and when I use access, I mean people having a means to access something that's really important to them. There are two categories of people in our world today. We have the haves and the have-nots. There are people who have, and they have everything in abundance. And there are those who lack. And in fact, it is being said that the pandemic has widened the gap between the haves and the have-nots. Because whereas the pandemic shrunk the access of some and limited the opportunity for many, there were those for whom the pandemic was a means to expand their opportunity, especially if you are wealthy already and you can sponsor the production of a vaccine. Can you imagine the amount of money you are making because of the pandemic? So there were those for whom the pandemic expanded their access to certain things in life. And there are those that the pandemic shrunk their access. Give you an example. Even take, for example, simple opportunity to serve Jesus or to even just go to church and fellowship. There were those, during the pandemic, their access to church was expanded. Now you might say that they couldn't go to church. Yes, they couldn't go to church, but I knew people, somebody told me in their home, they attended 3 services in a day because they just needed to change channels on their computer and they're in another worship service. But you know, there were people who couldn't attend any at all because either they had no computer or they had no internet service. So whereas the access for some was expanded, the access for others shrunk and became even more limited. At varying degrees of access determines the haves and the have-nots in our world. There are those with no access, and there are those with limited access. Take anything, means of livelihood or the gospel. There are those with no access at all. Even if they want, they can't have access. I'll give you an example. When you talk about means of livelihood, I live in the United States, or I've lived in the United States until June this year, when my wife and I moved to the UK. In the United States, if you are homeless, even if you can work, you are very unlikely to get a job. You know why? Because you have to have an address to get a job. And when you are homeless, where is your address? You cannot give an address under a bridge. So in reality, they have no access. Even if they wanted to work, they couldn't get a job simply because they lack access to something else, which is an address. So you have those who have no access at all, and then you have those with limited access. When you talk about that means of livelihood, you talk about the gospel as well. These are realities in our world. And then you have those with restricted access. Some people have some access, but they are restricted, they are limited. They can only go so far and no more. And then you have those with neglected access. that people have access, normally should have access, but will not take advantage of those access. And then you also have those who have with unlimited access, whatever they want, they can get. And you might say that, are there people with unlimited access to the gospel? And then we understand that Bill Gates can eat whatever he wants. He has the money, doesn't he? But what about the gospel? Are there people with unlimited access to the gospel? Of course, the answer is yes. In fact, most of the resources of the world, of the church in our world, is spent on those with unlimited access to the gospel. But we'll come to that in a minute. We'll look at that in a bit. So you have all these situations that had to do with access in our world. And I actually, you know, when we talk about the world, a lot of times we talked about poverty, and we talk about unreached peoples and unreached peoples. I have begun to reflect on these realities in terms of access. That people sometimes are poor not because they don't have access, but because they don't know how to make use of the access that they have. And others are poor because they have no access at all. So that even if they want to do something about their situation, they couldn't. That is true for means of livelihood, and it's also true for the gospel. And so in addition to access realities, the mission landscape is also changing rapidly. So you combine the challenge of access with a changing world, and you're just really in for incredible challenge. Now you understand why I use the language of Goliath. Because these things become like giants before us. When you look at a world that's changing so fast, my first visit to Korea was, I was corrected this morning, it was 2014, and it's almost 8 years ago. At the time, you know, we were using 3G, okay? Your telephones had 3G, and we thought that was the best you can ever have, isn't it? Most of us went and changed our phone to a 3G capable phone. At the time, we felt like the world, you know, the speed of texts and data and everything. And now, what are we using? 5G. Now, will any of you go back to use 3G? Probably not. In fact, if you move to a place now where they only use 3G, you'll be so frustrated. But remember, you were happy with 3G until somebody showed up with 5G, and suddenly you are no longer happy with 3G. That is the world in which we live. A world of rapid changes, and those changes create for us either things that we love and enjoy or things that create frustration for us, whether we talk of, you know, in our lives, in the church, in mission. The reality is that our world is changing so fast, we can barely catch up with ourselves. So it's important that we take these realities on board as we look at a post-pandemic future. And I want you to look at some statistics where I want to start this morning, because I want to start with the whole question of access to the gospel in the post-pandemic era. What I've called the story of three cities. Oh, do I have the... Does this work? Okay. Oh, this is forward. Good, thank you. So, I want you to look at those. I'm going to tell you the story. Look at those three cities up there. But before that, let me tell you their stories. So, City A. I'm going to tell you City A is a city, with 10 million people. Let's say it's a city among a people group. You know, those people group are 10 million people strong. They are considered to have 98% Christian. So when you go to the ethnic group is 98% Christian, okay? And 72% of those people will be considered evangelical. I mean, you know what, when we say evangelical, we're talking of people who believe they're born again and all of the criteria for being evangelical. That's one city. Okay? And that's a real city in our world today. City B is a city with about, among a people group, 1.7 million people, 34% Christian. The rest are Muslim, so about 66% was Muslim. 8% of those people are evangelicals. And city C is a city among a people group, 134 million people group. 0% Christian and 0% evangelical. So, question. Now you're going to have to respond to this. If you are going out as a missionary, well, first, if you are going to send out a missionary, let's say Acts want to send out a missionary, you all have come together and you believe that you engage in the world of missions, where should you send the next missionary? City A, City B, or City C? Pardon?
C.
C. How many people say C? C, okay. A? I had a few A's. Thank you. B? Okay. What about if you want to go? Which city will you like to go? A. Now, this is the third question. Which city do you think it's likely that the next missionary will go?
B.
B, C, okay. That is reality. We're coming back to that. We're going to come back to these cities in a bit. But let's move forward briefly. I want us to reflect on a passage of scripture that I think is really important to the conversation we're having now. In the book of Psalm 67 that we read, the scripture reads, "May the peoples praise you." You know that Psalm 67 starts with, "May God be gracious to us and bless us and cause his face to shine upon us, that your ways may be known on earth, your way may be known on earth, your salvation among all nations," all, every single nation. And scripture used nations not in terms of political divisions, but in terms of peoples. Okay? So that is the prayer that preceded verse 3. "May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. May the nations be glad and sing for joy. For you will judge the peoples with fairness and guide the nations on the earth." Selah. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. This is a prayer. Okay? In fact, when you dig into this psalm, you realize that the people of God were praying that the nations of the earth will have access to the salvation of God. This is a prayer that's centered on access. In this psalm, the people of Israel, the writer of Psalm 67, basically repurposed the prayer of blessing that used to be pronounced by the priest of the people of God in Numbers 6:24, basically repurposed that Numbers 6:24 blessing. You know, may God bless you and cause his face to shine upon you, you know, and so on. They repurposed that psalm, that prayer of the priest, into a prayer for the nations. God bless us and cause his face to shine upon us. And you remember during the pandemics, the blessing became very popular. You know, we sang the blessing for different nations. I'm sure there was the blessing for Korea, isn't it? It became a very popular song. And it says the passage that was really repurposed into a prayer for the nations in Psalm 67. I chose that because as we think about access, I want us to be thinking about what do people have access to and what don't they have access to. These people of God were praying that the nations will come to know the God of Israel. So as we think about that, and especially because the nations, the prayer here is for the joy of the nations. May the nations be glad and sing for joy. And sing for joy. people who don't have access to the things of God cannot sing for joy in the worship of God. So let's have that bear that in mind as we look at this missionary prayer. So what is the central theme of the missionary prayer song of Psalm 67? What's the central theme? It is that the people will praise God. May all the peoples praise you. It's repeated 4 times. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. Verse 3. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. Verse 5. It wasn't just that some of the people would praise God. It was that all the people would praise God. And remember, it's centered on the nations. And we're talking of the global mission now. So we're talking of a global reality of the praise of God. That was what the psalm was centered on. So if God is so passionate about the praise of the whole world that the Holy Spirit inspired a song about it, then I ask you a question, and I'm going to come to that question in a minute. The question is centered on what you just saw, the statistics you just saw, and the response you gave to those statistics. So bear that question in mind. If God is so passionate about the praise of the whole world that the Holy Spirit inspired a song about it, unless you don't think Psalm 67 is inspired by the Holy Spirit, in which case you run into some theological trouble, I believe. Because we believe the whole Bible is inspired by the Spirit of God, which means that Psalm 67 was inspired by the Holy Spirit. And if Psalm 67 was inspired by the Holy Spirit, and then we got to answer the question, because God was so passionate about the peoples of the world that we have this missionary prayer song in Psalm 67. If that is the case, then I'm going to be asking you a couple of questions. Why are things the way they are? Why is it that just in our discussion now, the consensus seems to be that cities A is more likely to attract a missionary? So city A is Nairobi, Kenya. City A, Nairobi, Kenya. The population of Nairobi itself is 6 million, but the Kikuyu people, total population is 10.5 million, okay? 98% Christian, 72% evangelical. But do you know that most missionaries today, we still consider going to Nairobi first? Why?
Headquarters.
Sorry, headquarters. Yes, wow. Yes, another reason?
It's safe.
So, safe. Okay, 2. Another reason, although I know that they do carjack people in Nairobi. Another reason?
Polling strategy.
Oh.
Polling strategy by invading the cities first.
Okay. Foreign strategy, yes?
Development.
Development, okay?
Raising up teammates.
Teammates, okay, very good. You are all really thinking, thank you. Others?
Easy access.
Easy access, yeah? Nairobi is also a very comfortable city to live in.
Yeah.
Nice weather. I think there are some people here who know Nairobi. And it's easy to live in Nairobi. It's a comfortable place. It almost has a Western kind of atmosphere to it. I mean, who doesn't like a Java coffee? You know? You get what I'm saying? So these are the kind of places that's attractive to go. So Nairobi gets the first choice of missionaries. Tabora in Tanzania is the example of the second one. And you know, when I gave you those statistics, they're actually real. They are not made up at all. These are actual statistics from Operation World. Okay? Tabora, 226,000 people, population among the Inyawezi people. The Inyawezi people are 1.7 million. 34% Christian, 60-something, 66% Muslims, 8% evangelicals. Now, people are likely to go there too, because there are Christians there. And Khulna in Bangladesh is the third example. 1.022 million out of the Sheikh Bangladeshi people, Bengali Islam, 134 million people, 134 million, 0% Christians, 0% evangelical. And it's the last place that a missionary will go. Now let me ask you this question. Who is a missionary? And why mission? Why mission? Why mission? If missionaries are not going to go to where there are no churches at all, why mission? Shouldn't we all just sit in our corners and enjoy the goodness of the Lord? Because the reality is that in Khulna, as far as we know, nobody is singing the praise of our God. Remember, may the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. The people of Khulna don't know to praise God, because they don't know the God to be praised. So when I talk about access, now you're getting a picture. The Khulna people don't have access. They have no access because they have no believer to tell them about Jesus. That we all agree that most likely the next missionary will go to the place with the most access. They already have more than enough. So when we blame people like Bill Gates and Elon Musk for trying to make more billions, you understand, some of us feel sometimes it's almost immoral because they have to do all kinds of things to make more billions so they can remain multi-billionaires. Whereas some workers that work for them, some people, they can barely afford their rent. You know that we do the same thing spiritually. That's exactly what we do. We give to these people who have more than enough. They are billionaires when it comes to the gospel and access to the gospel. Nairobi is one of the most Christianized cities in all of Africa. I mean, like churches everywhere, okay? But that's where the next missionary is likely to go. And Khulna, who has heard of Khulna? Have you heard of Khulna before? No. And yet a population of 1 million people with no gospel access. So that's why I titled this Access, focusing on access and the Goliaths of mission. The Goliaths of mission. So let's take a cue from Lausanne. So this is what Lausanne talked about, the whole gospel by the whole church to the whole world. The whole gospel by the whole church to the whole world. The idea is that we are taking the full gospel, and it's the whole church taking the gospel, not just a segment of the church, to the whole world, because it's the whole world that needs Christ. So the question I have here, based on the reality of the statistics we just looked at, is, do we truly believe that the whole gospel by the whole church is truly meant for the whole world? Because we're going to look at a few more things in a minute that will help us reflect on this as we think about access. Remember, we're looking at the whole Goliaths of mission in the post-pandemic world, and particularly the question of access. Access to the gospel, access to the means of livelihood, and the rapidly changing world of mission. So if the whole gospel is meant for the whole, to be taken by the whole church to the whole world, if so, then I have these questions. How is it that, looking from a gospel outreach perspective, so many things have not changed in our world? For example, we still have 3.28 billion people of the world who are still unreached and cannot join in the chant of praise to God, they do not know to praise God because they're still unreached, and perhaps they're probably more than this now because the world has now hit the 8 billion population, okay? 8 billion. But at least 40% or 41.5% of the world has still not heard the gospel. They have not had an opportunity to know there's a Jesus to believe in. And if they have anything about Jesus, it's a distorted view of who Jesus truly is. So how is that possible if we really believe that the whole gospel is the whole world? And looking from the perspective of global outreach, how is it that we could have the story of the 3 cities, about with some locations, villages and communities that have access to the gospel as much as they want, but there are places with no access at all? How is that possible? If we really believe that the whole gospel is to be taken by the whole church to the whole world, why is Kolna not having workers and Nairobi is having more than enough workers? A few years ago, my wife and I were in Nairobi, and we were visiting some friends that we had known from seminary back in Canada. And they picked us up, we visited them in their home, and they were taking us back to the center for the conference. We were in Nairobi for a conference. And on our way, I don't know how we got started, talking about missions and missionaries. And my friend turned to us and said, "Do you know there are more than 300 missionaries in the city of Nairobi?" And I was shocked. I was just shocked. 300 missionaries at that time in a city of 5 million, majority of who were believers in Jesus. That was shocking to me, because at that time we were serving in Niger Republic. Okay? At that time, Niger Republic had a population of 13 million. Okay? 13 million Muslims. A population of 13 million, a Christian population of 0.05%. And there were less than 300 missionaries in Niger at that time. Now, although Niger was predominantly a Muslim country, at that time, you can get a missionary visa to go to Niger. I mean, the government of Niger will give you a missionary visa. But why was everyone going to Nairobi and no one was going to Niger? You get the picture. So when I'm talking about access to the gospel, this is the reality of our world. It is still the reality today. Although God is doing some incredible things by himself and sometimes without us. And I have just come through listening to stories upon stories of Muslims who are coming to faith in Jesus. I just had a privilege of traveling through the Middle East, and from country to country to country, I felt like God is answering the prayer of Leonard Ravenhill. Leonard Ravenhill, in his book, Why Revive Atari, said, "Lord, if you can't do anything with us, do something without us." I do believe that God is actually doing something without us, because many Muslims are coming to faith in Jesus. And they are not coming because they met an evangelist. Of course, some of them have met someone, but it's because they have seen Jesus in dreams and visions. And I had hundreds of these stories in Lebanon, in Egypt, in Turkey, in United Arab Emirates. God is doing something without us. But this is the problem. Every one of those people, they still need a believer to explain the gospel to them. It's like, the Ethiopian eunuch on the road who was reading from the book of Isaiah. He had no clue. He was reading the Bible. This man was used to reading the Bible. But he still needed somebody to explain to him. Cornelius and his household. You remember the story of Cornelius? The Bible actually said he was a God-fearing man. But he still needed someone to explain the gospel to him. And as much as Christ is revealing himself to these Muslims, you hear some of these stories, you have chills, believe me, of what these Muslims are experiencing in terms of Jesus appearing to them and telling them what to do to know him. I don't know what your faith tradition is, but for a second time, I heard the story of a man who encountered Jesus in a dream, and he got a phone number of the person that he was to call. And the person was the one telling me the story himself. That this man called him and said, I have believed in Jesus and I need to be baptized. And the man said, how did you get my number? And the man said, Jesus appeared to me in my dream and gave me your number. Okay, now some of you will have to go back to your Bible and start reading again. See if your theology match up with the reality of what God is doing. But actually, I told the man who told me, because this man is seeing hundreds of Muslims come to faith. He's telling us we need missionaries because we need those who will disciple these people. They're coming to faith in their hundreds, in their thousands, but we need people to help us. Okay, I'm diverting there. But the reason that it struck me was that I've had that story from a different man before in another country, another Muslim country, where his phone number was given in a dream. So I began to feel like, although I thought the NSA in the US, the national security in the US, that they know my number and they know everything, I'm beginning to realize that perhaps Jesus also knows my number. But I'm talking about this because I want us to realize how, let me use the word, how desperate our God is that these people have access to the gospel. He's literally going about revealing himself to them. But they still need a believer to explain the way to them accurately. They still have to encounter a believer who can tell them about Jesus. 3.28 billion people who still don't have access. Think about that. Think about that. This is the situation for all the Christians, missionaries in the world. This is Catholic, Protestants, everyone. This is the distribution of the missionaries around the world. This is the way we look at access. 77.3% of all foreign missionaries, that's those who left their country and go to another country, or who are cross-cultural in their ministry. 77.3% are still among the reached. They are still going to places like Nairobi. Do you get a picture? Like 77%. And 19.4% are going to the unevangelized part of the world, like Tabora in Tanzania, where there are believers, but there are still people who needed to be evangelized. And only 3.3% of all missionaries are going to the unreached peoples of the world. 3.3%. Think about that for a minute. When we think about access to the gospel, we are sending only 3% of all our human resources, God's people, among those who need the gospel the most. That's the reality. Think about it. So this is what the picture looks like. The purple part, that's where the gospel is present. And this part, the orange part, if it looks like orange to you, that's where the gospel is most needed. But the movement of people, of believers, are usually within the purple. More purple people go to purple people. And purple people don't want to mix up with the orange people, maybe because they don't want to become orange, if I can put it that way. But this is the reality when we talked about access to the gospel. So think about it. When we talk about access to the gospel, In 1911, okay, when I want you to look at this map here, the first Global World Congress on Evangelism happened in Edinburgh in 1911, okay? As at that time in 1911, this was the map of the unreached peoples of the world. So the color, the colored part, the white part, that's what it looked like, okay? In Edinburgh, this is, you can see the map, this is the tip of Africa there. This is Africa, you can see the tip of Africa here. And so this is what the map looked like of the unreached part of the world, okay? In 2020, this is what it looked like. Does that look the same to you? The exact same places in the world that didn't have the gospel, access to the gospel in 1911, was still the same part of the world that had no access to the gospel in 2020. Think about that. People in the countries with the fewest evangelical believers. Did you see similarities? In 1911 and 2020, the map remained the same. It seemed like not much has changed after all. And what about countries or peoples in countries with the fewest missionaries? Still the same. Still exactly the same. What about the statistics as we have it? 86% of those who are unreached with the gospel don't know a Christian. They've never met a believer. Even if they want to know Jesus, they don't have someone to tell them about Jesus. Even if they have a dream, they still don't know a believer to turn to help them discover who Jesus is. This is the reality of our world. And that is why access to the gospel is one of the giants post-pandemic. The lack of access to the gospel. The reality that many still don't have access to someone who can tell them about Jesus. Think about it. There are 4.19 million full-time Christian workers, and 95% are working within the Christian world. Actually, that statistics, I should correct it, is about 5.5 million. 5.5 million full-time Christian workers in the world. That's those who work in the church, those who work in mission. If you take everyone together, 5.5 million, 95% are working within the Christian world. Okay? In 2001, there were 900 churches for every one unreached people group in the world. And yes, they are still unreached. 900 churches, like if 900 churches can get together to send people to an unreached people, we will have people among every one of them. But in 2021, they still remain unreached with the gospel. If you think about the evangelicals, there are at least 78,000 evangelical Christians for every one unreached people group in the world, and many still don't have a witness. They still don't have access. Can you imagine, like 78,000 evangelicals to every unreached people group? 41% of the population of the world. So the question is, think about this, is the whole gospel really for the whole world? That's the question. Is the gospel, do we really believe that the whole world should have access to the gospel? Let me quickly show you some of some pictures. This is the way it looks like when if you think of a place like Toronto in Canada. I'm just using this visual. Okay, if you are looking for a believer in a small town in Canada, where you want to find a believer, you will find one believer in about 10 people. Okay, in a small town in Canada. But let's see if you go beyond one small town and you decide to go to a place like Toronto or a larger city, in an English-speaking city. This is what it will look like. The number of people you will pass before you find a believer, probably about 40. And then what about if you go further than that and you say, okay, let's go to Quebec. This is the French-speaking part of Canada. Every red is a believer, okay? So if one of these people want to know Jesus, how would they find somebody to ask about Jesus? You get the picture? So I gave you statistics before. Now just look at it pictorially. This is what it means to want to know Jesus in the province of Quebec, in Canada. And what if you then say, okay, let's go to a place like Thailand. This is what it looks like among the Thai-speaking people. You have to go through hundreds of people to find a believer to ask about Jesus. Okay? But, okay, let's go for maybe Tajikistan, among the Tajik people. Can you find a believer? Can you find a believer? Right there somewhere. You imagine how, okay, I've been talking about access. How on earth will the person up here have access to the gospel when the only gospel presence is this tiny little one here? What about in Turkey, among Turkish people? You probably can't even find a believer. It's there. Yes, there is. There is a believer there somewhere. Right there.
Right side.
Okay.
Right side left down.
Thank you. You found him or her? I'm sure it's probably a lady. Yes. Here. Now, I want you to just think about these pictures in terms of access. How will any of these people come to know Jesus? You get what I'm saying? Think about it in terms of access. Okay, what about, let's do one last one here. Afghanistan? Even me, I can't find that one.
On sabbatical.
So this is what it looks like. Now look at this. Look at compare this. 97% are working among these people, and 3 are working among this. So 97 out of all the missionaries are working here, and 3 are working here. How is that even fair? You get a picture. How will these people ever have access to the gospel? That's why it's a giant. The lack of access is one of the giants of missions today. This is what it looks like when you think about where people are going. So a lot of people still go to places like Brazil. In fact, in 2010, 20,000 missionaries went to Brazil. 20,000 went to Brazil alone. And that's what it looks like, because Brazil has a lot of believers, and yet more workers go there. Do you know the country that received the most missionaries in the whole world? Guess. Who can guess?
US.
You're right. The most missionaries in the whole world go to the United States. 32,000. Now you get the picture. 32,000 go to the United States. This is the Muslim world. This is the access in the Muslim world. I can see the person. You're talking of 1 missionary to every 400,000. 400,000. So, let's look at money. Where's the money going? This is an interesting one. The home ministry of the local church takes the most money that is available to God's work. 734 billion. 82% of all the money that comes to the church stays within the church. 82%. And then home mission takes 107 billion rather. Then this is what goes to mission. 52 billion or 5.8%. But out of that, only 1.7% go to try to reach the 3.2 billion people without the gospel. That's how the funding of mission is happening today. And I mentioned this earlier on. The number of workers, Christian workers, only 0.37% of the total actually try to work among the unreached. That's why there's one believer, one missionary to 400,000 missionaries. I mean, Muslims, 400,000 Muslims. I hope, I want you to think about these things because it goes to the heart of access to the gospel. Access to, let's quickly look at access to means of livelihood. Access to means of livelihood. What is that like? Here is the situation. Many people today, this is what we call the giants of COVID. The giant of COVID is that all of these things, the loss of livelihood, the economic downturn, educational polarities, lockdown and restrictions, death and illness, social unraveling, political upheaval. These were all the things that COVID brought to the surface. They were there, okay? COVID didn't produce this. COVID just made it worse. COVID created a different, another layer of complexity to the lack of access that characterized this situation in our world. And the reality is that when you go from here, this is the natural progression from one of these to the next one, to the next one, to violence, to xenophobia, to all kinds of health system breakdown and so on. Now, why is this important? Because these are the contextual realities of where the gospel is needed, okay? So the people who lack access to the gospel are also the people who have lack access to the means of livelihood most of the times. So they lack access to the gospel, they lack access to means of livelihood, and they encounter these realities on a daily basis. And so because of that, as people of God, when we think of what is our response to not only the lack of access to the gospel, but the lack of access to means of livelihood, I believe the best place to start is here. An intervention at this level will prevent the progression to this level. But if we miss it here, we must intervene here. That means whatever 5 stones God has given us to slay Goliath, we must make use of them at this point so that we can intervene as part of our ministry in the context. So the first is focused on the gospel access. I'm now focusing on the context of the gospel itself, the lack of means of livelihood in the context to which we are called to take the gospel. This is the same thing, but just written out differently. But just an idea of what it looks like for people who don't have access to the means of livelihood. This is the second giant that I want you to think about in terms of mission today. The first is the access to the gospel. It's critical. But this is just as critical because this is the context to which you will go to present the gospel of Christ. I've spent time just recently, privileged to spend time with pastors in Lebanon who talked about the fact that they had all these Syrian refugees, many of them Muslims, but their immediate need was to be able to feed their children. So what do? You say, unless you listen to the gospel first, I won't give you food? No. The reality of the context means that you have to do something else first before they are able to hear the gospel. So access to the means of livelihood is one of those critical things that we need to think about. All these giants are part of the world to which God has called us to serve, to make Him known and to be His witness. And this kind of a world needs hope, hope-filled ministry. And only the witnesses to Christ will bring such ministry to our world. We need hope-filled ministry in the world today. Hope-filled ministry that gives access to the gospel to those who will never have access to the gospel. Access to the gospel, access to the means of livelihood, that's the second giant. And the third one I'm going to go through quickly is the rapid changing mission landscape. The rapid changing mission landscape. A rapidly changing mission landscape. The mission landscape is changing so rapidly that when you combine the lack of access to gospel with the lack of access to means of livelihood, you have got a major challenge. And then we deal with a rapidly changing world. So One of those changes in our world is what I've called from anywhere to everywhere. Basically, missionaries are now going from everywhere to everywhere. It's not just missionaries going from the Western world to the other parts of the world. The reality is that God is calling people from anywhere now and sending them wherever. But that comes with its own challenges as well. Because how do people who come from very different economic reality work together as a team? Those are some of the challenges we face. When you can't even buy a little car and your colleague can buy a 4x4, and you are working in the same village, and you are dealing with the same realities, how do you keep unity? How do you make the focus on access to the gospel your primary? So those are some of the challenges. COVID is an excuse for closure in some places. COVID has become a good excuse for closure. That's one of those changing realities in our world. COVID hasn't gone away. It's abated, but it is still there. That's why many of you are wearing your masks, okay? And then you think of leadership transitions in many organizations. In many places today, local people are replacing the expatriates. And that creates a challenge of its own in global mission as well. And then restricted access becoming closed access. That is, in some places you have restrictions before. Now they are even closed completely. For example, we couldn't have workers many of our workers in China couldn't go back because the restriction that exists before COVID has turned to a complete closure and shutting out of people. Okay, these are realities in the world. Religiously motivated closures in many countries because of the restriction of religion. You have no access to people. Increasing need for local ownership of ministry. These are some of the realities of the mission world because the world is changing. In Burkina Faso, we had to pull out many of our workers from the places where they used to work. Why? Because of terrorism. And now local people have to take that over. And this is reality, not just in Burkina, in several countries. In the places, we worked in Niger for many years. The places we used to go, even for vacation in Niger, you can't go there anymore for anything because it's completely shut down because of terrorism. These are some of the realities of mission, some of the rapidly changing world. Places could be open today and tomorrow they are closed. Political closure. Countries' realities are changing. Who could have imagined this time of last year that we cannot freely travel to Ukraine now, today, at this point? But the reality has changed. And this is happening everywhere. There are those that you are aware of. There are many that are local realities that you don't hear about. But they are part of the realities of the mission world in which we work. Security closure due to terrorism, wrestling with the power of money in mission. Money is still a big beast in mission. It's still a reality in the mission world, and it still plays a significant role in the mission world. So these are all the kind of things we have to deal with as we think of the giants of a rapidly changing world. So, with a post-pandemic world, with realities of post-pandemic world, what are the 5 stones that God has given to us for a world that lack access to the gospel and access to a life of hope? What do we have? I put there the word of the Apostle Paul in Romans 10. How then can they call upon him of whom they have not heard? Without hearing, they can't. And Matthew wrote that he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless. How can they hear? Compassion. That's what it calls for. Compassion. I started with this passage. May the nations be glad and sing for joy. That is still the prayer. Let me close with a quick point to a story for you. I want to just close with this. This is our purpose, convinced that no one should live and die without hearing God's good news. We believe He's calling us to all these nations to make disciples of the Lord Jesus Christ. But I want to tell you the story of Dave. I want to close. Sorry, you have a number of these things in your handout, but I want to close with the story of this young man really quickly, Joshua. Incidentally, his name was Joshua. Now, I'm not talking of this one. I can tell you the story of this one too, but because of time, I'll tell you the story of Joshua. This is Joshua. Can you see him? You can see the man laying down there. That's his bed. That's how he moved around. Okay. Joshua was a believer in Christ, and Joshua wanted to participate in the mission of God. In a state like that, Joshua felt he too should be able to do something. So Joshua decided to become a soccer coach. A soccer coach. And Joshua joined the SIM Sports Friends Ministry in Nigeria and became a coach to a group of young people. When Joshua sends his boys out to play, you know the way he's sitting, that's how he will lay there, turn and watch them as they play, and when he observes some behavior that he felt was not consistent with being Christian, he calls them together and he talks to them. Joshua was a mentor to many coaches. And the person who told me Joshua's story is a very important worker in the sports ministry of SIM in Nigeria today. Joshua was his mentor. The man was much taller than me, but Joshua was his mentor. Joshua served Jesus until God called him home about 3 years ago. Now think about it. If a man in this state can be thinking about those who have no access to the gospel and he wanted to play his part, what about you? What about you? I want you to leave this place today thinking about access to the gospel, access to means of livelihood, the challenges of a rapidly changing world in a post-pandemic world of mission. I want you to also think about Joshua. If Joshua could play his part, what part do you want to play? Thank you.
Thank you very much for your excellent presentation. And I also discovered this morning he's a great storyteller as well. Let's clap for him once more. And again, besides of this, I learned one thing from him, that he's a world best mission mobilizer that I had never seen ever before. Because my heart already burning over, as if I am going to the mission field again. He's really pulling me to go there again.
Why not?
Yes.
Welcome to join SIM,
Yes.
even now.
Before I invite you, some of you, to come for the questions of his presentation, he came along with his colleagues, dignitaries. I want to mention some of them, his name. Reverend Dr. Joshua Kim and his wife, SIM Korea. Please rise from your seat. Yes, please welcome them. And the Regional Director of East Asia of SIM, is it Reverend? Yes, Wasin Rajaratnam and his wife. And Pacific Asia Regional Director, Reverend Dr. Bak Sang-uk. Yes. Reverend Lee Sung-mo. Yes. Yes. Is there anyone that I left over?
One of our staff.
Yes, one of you. Yes, staff. Yes, now, I want to you to come over to give him or to draw him a question, a drilling question. Please raise your hand first for me to see how many of you are willing to. Okay, Mugisa number 1. For the sake of Africans, I want to give James number 2, Amir number 3, Anush number 4, William number 5, and McDonald number 6. We have 6 questions at this moment. Is there anybody else? Yes, please come forward. Yes.
And coffee
Number
tickets.
7, John Connie.
Coffee tickets for those.
Yes, and as usual, you'll take over the coffee coupon. Yes, number 1. Please come forward. Those.
I think the mic is now working.
Yeah, it's working.
Is it working?
Yeah, it's working.
Now it's working. Please, second, number 2, number 3 over here to save our time.
Yes, I would love to take this opportunity to, first of all, thank Dr. Joshua for a very deep presentation on this particular topic of mission after the pandemic era. My name is Gad Mugisa, and I'm from Uganda. When you are talking about Kenya, I was so much excited because I have visited Nairobi City, I think more than 6 times since 2006. And it's really a populated place, and with many Christian mission groups that are there. And I also did ministry, especially with the students, with the university, especially in the areas of Machakos and some other few places. A key statement that you mentioned clearly on this is that the giants have already been there, but the COVID pandemic just skyrocketed them to another level. And what is so perplexing now in this is how best can this COVID era continue to curb down these giants that you have mentioned? Because it's true that they have been there, but COVID just came like an eye-opener for us to move to another level. But again, yet, there are factors that affect the mission work, and one of the factors that you mentioned clearly was about the different economic levels of the countries. And yet, from my analysis as a missiology student, I will say at the moment, Asia as a continent and Africa are on the rise to take the gospel to other parts of the world. But now Asia is slightly higher in terms of economic status compared to Africa. How best can Asia and Africa cooperate to take the gospel back to West? Would there be some key areas that we can address together, that we can cooperate? Because this work is not one man's thing. It has to be a team, collective, so that we can take the gospel to the most affected places. At this moment, you made it very clear that West, especially America, many missionaries were sent there, It's so amazing because also America sends missionaries. It is so very paradoxical. America sends missionaries, but again we're saying many missionaries went to America. So somehow it is a paradox. How do we reconcile that?
Thank you. I think there are multiple questions in that. I will try my best to address the key ones that I picked up. I think the first one is that there are three things I picked up from your question. The first one is the giants of COVID, if I can put them that way. How do we address that in the context of ministry? The second is the challenge for Africa and Asia in terms of the gospel, taking the gospel out there. And I won't say taking the gospel to the West, because I think there are more places that are in greater need of the gospel than the West, as far as I know. So I will address. And the third is the whole question of, what is happening, the paradox of going to the West and coming out from the West. So going to the first one of the things we've realized when you talk about ministry is this. We've had a debate going on in the evangelical mission world for several years. And that's the debate between proclamation and action. Should we proclaim the gospel primarily, or should we act? Should we respond to needs? Is it our responsibility to think about the economic situation of the people, or are we just there to present the gospel so that they are saved? These are debates and conversations that have been going on in different parts of the evangelical world and even among missiologists for a long time. And the reality is that it's not resolved because everyone who speaks is very strong in their position. And those who believe it's primarily proclamation still think, you just make sure they get to heaven. And others are saying, but how will they hear you if they are hungry? So we still have that debate. I think with the reality of what we've seen with COVID is that an either-or debate is unhelpful. Because it's not an either-or. A human being is not either spirit or body. It's both spirit and body. So we believe that one of the ways we need to begin to address this is particularly to learn about the context in which we're going to work. The pattern of ministry in the past has been for people to come into a context and determine what they will do in that context. So you come to a community, you want to present the gospel to them. Sometimes you might just start with Bible studies, for example. Or you might start with a story, chronological story, for example. And there's no question about whether the children in that community have access to clean water. That just doesn't happen. And I know many ministry contexts where that is the situation. And we are saying, no, but that needs to change. We need to begin to look at the people as a whole, that they're whole people with both spiritual needs but also physical needs. And COVID had made that even more the reality for them, that some of those who have means before don't have anymore. So in reality, instead of simply just going to do chronological storying, we might need to be able to begin to say, so what are the needs of this community? And we can only know that by asking the community people themselves. How can we work with you to address some of your greatest immediate needs? And sometimes it could be water, for example. Then you work together to dig a well or a borehole, something that addressed that need, that maybe was there before but has been made worse by the reality of COVID, for example. I mean, imagine when people used to have to go to another community to fetch water and then you have COVID shut down. How do you live in that kind of situation? So that's responding to that, your first question. The second question is in terms of the means of sending workers, the fact that, the economic reality. My belief is this. Well, yes, Asia is better off, most part of Asia, I would say, is better off than most part of Africa. But a lot of times, part of it is our own fault. It's our own lack of proper management of our resources. Asia does not have more resources than Africa. They just manage their resources better than Africa. That's the reality. Now, I'm going to say this. There are so much resources within the church in Africa. So when it comes to mission, African churches are very wealthy, except that we don't use the wealth properly.
With your very nice presentation, but I rise in defense of Nairobi and other cities which may appear to have more Christians than most places. When you look at Turkey, for example, Istanbul, the city of Islam, it was one time the city of Apostle Paul, Christian, perhaps more Christian than Nairobi has ever been. But then again, I think for some reason they fell off. And I would want to perhaps ask, could there be a way to ensure that perhaps we have a formula to still continue feeding the seemingly supplied places like Nairobi, because we are naturally Christians. I was born a Christian almost. I started serving at the age of 10 in a church. And I've been in Uganda for 5 years. I started from Uganda. And my first culture shock was the way the Christians interact with the Muslims in Uganda. You may not tell the difference. In Kenya, Christians, we really are a bit, we keep to ourselves and we don't allow anyone into our space. And I want to say, we may appear perhaps to have high numbers, but there's an issue of quality. And I would think, as we look at where to send or where to put our focus, we could have perhaps get now the scholars, the knowledgeable. I've been in church, like I've said, from 1981, serving. But when I was coming here, I wasn't sure if I was going to learn anything. But in the 1 year that I've been here, just 1 year, I've learned so much. And I'm wondering, what have I been sharing with my people without the knowledge I've gained from Nairobi, Kenya? So I think it's a biblical principle to give more to those who have more. Please, next time when people from Nairobi apply to come to ACTS, please don't say Nairobi has so many.
Thank you. Thank you, brother. Yes, thank you for making the case for Nairobi. And you used the example of Istanbul. It's very interesting you chose that example because today is Friday. Last week, Wednesday, I was actually in Istanbul. I was in Hagia Sophia. And to see the reality of what has happened to that edifice that has now been turned back to a mosque. And you can do a tour. You can do a tour. In fact, I have several pictures here. And a group of us were able to get in there and actually pray for the country inside the Hagia Sophia. So the point I'm making is that, yes, history tells us that edifices don't make the church. Okay? I think one of the challenges for the church in Nairobi is also the same challenge for the churches in Africa. It's this. And I believe it's true for the church across the world. It's not peculiar to Africa. It's true. I've lived in the US for 17 years. I can tell you the Christianity in the US is only an inch deep. It doesn't go beyond your political opinion. The reality is that what has been most neglected in the church is disciple making. Jesus said, go and make disciples, not go and make converts. We've been satisfied with filling the churches with converts. Many who don't know their left from their right, who don't actually know the Word of God, and if they know it, they have not learned to obey it. And if they have learned to obey it to some degree, they have not learned to obey it no matter the cost. And it is that cost that makes a disciple a disciple. Remember, Jesus didn't just tell the disciples, you should learn your Bible well. Memorize the passages. No, he said, take your cross and follow me. You must hate father, mother. And then, when the question was asked, and he responded, those who follow me in this world, they will have, brothers and sisters and all. But then he said, and persecution too. Jesus promised us persecution. He promised us suffering. How many churches preach suffering today? How many actually are willing to suffer for their faith? So what we lack is disciple making. Disciples who want to stand for Jesus no matter the cost. So that's what Nairobi needs. It's people who will come there not to preach more gospel, but to make disciples of those who have already heard the gospel, so that they can live life for Jesus. That is where you break down the barrier between Muslims and Christians. You cannot separate yourself and say we don't deal with the Muslims. So how are the Muslims supposed to hear the gospel if you don't interact with them? The word became flesh and dwelt among us. He dwelt among us, and we held his glory. His glory, the glory as only the only begotten Son, full of grace and truth. How did we know? Because he interacted with us.
Yes.
The believers have to interact with non-believers, and that happened at the level of disciple making. So I don't think you need more missionaries in Nairobi. You need disciple makers. And believe me, it's not every missionary that's a disciple maker. In fact, today many missionaries will tell you they don't know how to make disciples because they have never been discipled themselves. I have heard that from our own missionaries who said to me, you're talking about, in fact, I heard from a church planting, a couple who are doing church planting in Latin America, and I was visiting them, and I stayed in their home, and we were talking, and they said, Joshua, you've been emphasizing disciple making in SIM, and they said, we've been in church planting for 12 years. We don't know how to make disciples. We were never discipled. We are just doing hit and miss because we've never experienced it ourselves. So the church that they planted, how will anybody know how to make disciples? You get the picture? Yes. I'm not saying that people should not go to Kenya anymore. I know northern Kenya still need missionaries. But many of those can come from the churches in Nairobi and in other parts of Africa as well, but also from Asia and others. But we have to be targeted in the way we direct the resources that God has given to us.
Because of a lunch time, we should shorten a little bit, because